fellow bookworms, it's Katie. Today we're going to ask the question, is the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch worth your time? So the Gentleman Bastard series is so far a trilogy, but I have heard whispers that the fourth book is due to be released in September. Okay, my notes. The Gentleman Bastard series starts with the life of Lamora and goes on with Red Seas Under Red Skies, and then the so far last book in the series is the Republic of Thieves. This is planned to be a 7-book series. It's by Scott Lynch. The first book came out in 2006, the second book came out in 2007, the third book came out in 2014. This time I structured my review portion a little bit differently, and also I can promise you this is going to be a long video because I have a lot of thoughts. Before I start off with anything, let me just tell you about the world building and about the writing, because I believe, or I feel like, these two things are the most consistent throughout the 3 books. And then I will move on for plot and characters through the respective 3 books. I won't spoil anything. There will just be a little bit of a spoiler for the second book, but that is the existence of the third book, basically. The world building is pretty excellent, and I feel like it is on the same level throughout the 3 books. It is this medievalish world with the city-states that, you know, rose from the ashes of a fallen empire that make me think of Italy and the city-states there in, you know, the 13th, 14th, 15th century. Camorra, the place where the first book is set in, reminds me very strongly of Venice, like a magical Venice. There's also, of course, some magic in this world. There are the Bons Magi. There are these dangerous and mysterious magicians, and their powers are a little bit, you know, vague. We don't really know too much about them because they are supposed to be this unknown quantity. And then there's also alchemy, that is the very day-to-day life magic that pretty much everyone uses. I really enjoyed that this world is super thought through with the history and religion, and you really get a sense of the world, you really get a sense of the vastness of the world and of the very different places, different cultures. I mean, the history and language really also affect how people talk, and that is some level of writing that I aspire to, you know, be at someday. The world was definitely one of my favorite aspects just because it feels so alive. So let's move on to the writing. The books are told in multiple POVs, always in third-person narrative. We have always Locke's POV, then we have sometimes Jean's POV, 2 of the main characters. And then we have the odd one. That could be an antagonist, that could be the villain, that could be just some random person to build suspense because the reader gets information that the main characters don't have. To the structure, the first and third book are structured similarly in that there's always a past chapter and then there's a present chapter. In the second book, the structure is a bit different. We have a few chapters that are set a few months in the past or a few years in the past. Don't go that much back as in the first and third book, and they're alternating with the present up until about a third into the book, and then we just only have the present plotline. And really the writing in the first book really especially swept me off my feet because there's just rhythm to the prose, the word choice is just great. The writing just flows so nicely, and it even verges on beautiful sometimes. I feel like in the second and third book it lost a little bit of that quality. There were some nonsensical sentences and there were some just clumsily structured sentences with a little bit of a poor wording maybe. I think the writing is generally very good, but especially in the first book. So in the first book, Locke and his little band of the Gentleman Bastards, they are thieves, they are con artists, and they are in the process of pursuing a plan of robbing this one noble guy of an extraordinary amount of money. When this game is interrupted by the presence of the Grey King, because Camorra is ruled, or the underworld of Camorra is ruled by this one person that is called Kappa Barsavi. He has been the main crime lord basically in the city for a while, but now there's the presence of the Grey King and he is killing the Garistas, the underlings of Kappa Barsavi, of which Locke is one of them. Locke is a Garista, and the Grey King is killing them off, and nobody really knows what the main goal of the Grey King is, and he's kind of interrupting Locke's, you know, scheme. And danger arises for Locke and the gentleman bastards. I felt like the pacing of the first book is sometimes a little bit slow. I mean, it definitely takes its sweet time to start. That is because of the structure of the intercepting alternating chapters. There are several different plot lines and there are several different subplots and story elements that kind of serve for the reader to be led down the wrong track. And I thought they came together pretty perfectly. Everything makes sense in the end, and I fully expected it to go a completely different way than it went. But still in the end I sat there and was like, yeah, that makes sense. All the hints are there. How did I not pick up on that? I am not very smart, obviously. There are a lot of side quests that might not have been entirely necessary to show, but they are a lot of fun and they don't drag the momentum down. You pretty much want to see how Locke's outrageous smartassery plays out. You just want to see how he gets out of these impossible situations. I really enjoyed that the plot had consequences and lasting effects on the characters. So let's talk about the characters. In the first book we have Locke, one of our main protagonists. He is pretty much the clever leader. He's sometimes arrogant, he can be too self-absorbed, he's a little bit of a smartass, but he really cares for his friends and his family. Then we have Sean, his best friend. He's this loyal, heart of gold guy, but he's the muscle of the gang and he has a temper. Let's just say that. Then we have the Sansa twins. They are basically the comic relief. And then we have Bug, an 8, I think he's, how old is he? 12? About 12-year-old, you know, kid. And he pretty much serves as the stand-in for the reader, so the older members of the gang can explain stuff to him and, you know, explain stuff to the reader. You know. I would definitely say that all the characters are authentic, that they act authentic throughout the book, and I just love their dynamic. You really see how they came together as family and how they came to care for each other so much. We have one big villain and a few antagonists. The motivation of the villain is really believable. It's just maybe a little bit, you know, too much pulled out of thin air. His motivation was a little bit like, yeah, it's reasonable, but also where is this coming from? I don't feel like he has been set up properly. And that is why I didn't give this book 5 stars. But I really enjoy that Locke's and the villain's motivation kind of mirror each other, and when they finally face each other, it's almost a poetic moment. So yeah, that was my review of the first book. Highly recommended. Let's move on to the second book, Red Seas Under Red Skies. In this book, Jean and Locke have fled the city of Camor after the events of the first book, and they've ended up in Tal Vera. It is another, you know, city that is set on islands, and then they have a little bit of a game going on, but the acorn, or the basically military leader of this city-state has his own plans, and he forces them to participate in his plan of threatening the city with a pirate army so he can stay the military leader of this island. Yeah. So then the two go on to be pirates. Yeah. If this didn't make sense for you, then I can just tell you that the plot is a lot more convoluted and messy in the second book than it is in the first book. The balance between the subplots is just not as good. The goals kind of get lost in all of these subplots, and you don't really know what's happening anymore, and it's just so much that is happening. Didn't nearly as much enjoy the plot in this book than I did in the first book, but that is maybe also that I just don't like pirate books. I get seasick very quickly, so I don't like boats. And all the long descriptions in this book about all things nautical were just so boring and so long-winded, and I just skim-read them at some point because they did nothing for the story. They did nothing to progress, you know, the story or the characters. I also felt like this book didn't really have any stakes because the two main characters, Locke and John, get poisoned to do the bidding of the military leader, and they're not really in danger, you see, because just the existence of the third book means that they get out of the situation alive, so there were not really any stakes for them, so it made the book kind of boring. And to be honest, like, the plot got so boring. This book took me ages to read. I think it took me about 3 or 4 weeks to read this book, and it almost catapulted me into a reading slump. It was a drag. Right, let's talk about the characters. So I would, describe this book as Locke and John's romance book. Their friendship really gets put to the test and is the main focus of the book, or is the main focus for the character development. Locke has to deal with a little bit of alcoholism after the events of the first book, and their relationship is further tested when John falls in love and Locke feels abandoned and is jealous of this relationship. But that also means that he gets a little bit of character development and he has to work and improve himself so that their friendship will survive. I felt like the two main protagonists didn't act as clever as they did in the first book, which was one of the main selling points for me in the first book. It's like one of my favorite things in the first book, that they are so clever and that they get out of impossible situations, and now it's just like they're just there and they just run around screaming, basically. Yeah, so needless to say, I was a little bit disappointed. I also felt like the villains were these mustache-twirling kind of villains, and at no point did they seem scary or menacing, and I always knew that the boys would get out of this book alive and they were just not in danger at all throughout this whole book, and I just felt this book was very disappointing after the first book. Yeah, I gave it 3 stars. On to the last book, The Republic of Thieves. So, in this book, Jean and Locke have gone to another city, and they are approached by the Bonds Magi to participate in their election that is happening every 5 years. So they agree to that because the Bonds Magi make an offer that they really can't refuse. Go to Carthine, the city of the Bonds Magi, and they participate in this political intrigue. Matters get further complicated when Jean and Locke learn that their opposing faction hired Sabitha, their long-lost gentleman bastard sister, and Locke's former lover, and Locke is still smitten. He's still in love with her. And so they have to work against their old friend, and yeah, that happens. That's it. So, to the plot, I have to say that it started really strong with the political intrigue, but unfortunately it very quickly went off the rails and became this super generic, super boring, sometimes even cringeworthy romance between Sabitha and Locke. This is an instance of two characters being forced together by the will of the author and nothing else. I've also felt like this plot suffered a lot of tell-over show. The political intrigue gets very pushed to the background pretty much and is only told in little summaries, but it doesn't get shown, and I thought that was a very that was a missed opportunity right there, because I was there for the political intrigue and not for the boring romance. Then we have also the plotline of the past with Locke and Sabitha in the center of it. There's an instance of insta-love, and I'm just like, Locke, you're 6 years old. Just what are you doing? What are you doing, my boy? After all of that with the plot, and I was already a little bit disappointed, but then there is this reveal of, something. It's about something that pretty much deconstructs one of the characters completely, and I thought it was pulled so much out of thin air. Like, there was no setup for it, and it was just the dumbest reveal ever, and the book completely lost me after that. I was just like, yeah, okay, whatever. But really disappointed me super much is that the plot has no consequence. In the end of the book, the characters talk to each other and they realize the entire plot had no consequence whatsoever. Even the characters admit it. The plot is absolutely unnecessary. Everything that happens is unnecessary in this book. That should not happen. You should not write a book when the characters, in the end, realize everything we just did was unnecessary. But really what annoyed me most was the romance, which is front and center in this book, and that was entirely the fault of the characters because they have no chemistry whatsoever. So let's talk about them. Basically, the characters in this book have loads and loads of problems. So let's start with Jean and Locke's friendship, which pretty much carried the entire 2 other books. It gets completely pushed into the background. It gets sacrificed to the almighty love story. Locke transforms from being a clever smartass into a lovesick moron. I can't put it otherwise. And then, my friends, and then we have Sabitha and the romance. Oh my god. Buckle in, you guys. We're up for a rant. Sabitha is pretty much built up through the other 2 books, and there's a lot of suspense. And I was so excited to meet her. And I got pretty disappointed. At first, she seemed to be so great. She has none of Locke's nonsense and she's not interested in Locke, and she completely tells him to, you know, go fuck yourself. I'm not interested in you romantically, just leave me alone. And especially in the past chapters, there were several instances, several paragraphs where I just sat there like, yes, yes, preach sister, yes! And I was actually really surprised because this was written by a male author, and I thought we finally have a male author that is, you know, aware and is not sexist, which is often the case in fantasy, is that fantasy written by male authors is a little bit sexist, or very sexist in some instances. There were several paragraphs where she told him, Locke, I don't owe you a smile. Locke, I don't owe you a good mood, and I don't have to be nice to you if you are, you know, behaving like a dumbass. She also tells him that she doesn't have to fall in love with him just because he is nice to her and just because she knows that he is in love with her. And then we have the present chapters where she's all business and she doesn't give a rat's ass about Locke and his romantic inclinations. But then it gets ruined. I really enjoyed her character in the beginning, and I really, you know, loved that she was like, Locke, you're obsessed with me, I know, just stop it. They both have no chemistry with each other, Locke and Sabitha, but they get pushed together into this romance because I guess we have to have the romance, and like the author wanted them to have a romance and fall for each other, which makes no sense whatsoever for their characters, especially for Sabitha. Her character pretty much takes a 180-degree turn, and we sacrifice everything that she is for her to be in this romance with Locke. It's just so frustrating and out of character, and I just really hate that because it just doesn't make sense for her. I wish it had been that way, that Locke's arc in this book would have been to finally realize, okay, this obsession that I have with this girl or this woman is unhealthy and it's time for me to move on. She clearly does not want to be with me and I accept that. But instead, no, Sabitha, why? Okay, so I'm going a little bit on a tangent here, but I feel like this is a problem of fantasy at large, where you see that, for example, also in the Kingkiller Chronicle with Denna and Quoth, where Denna clearly is not in love with Quoth, but Quoth is so obsessed with her and, you know, holds on to her until she pretty much surrenders to his romantic inclinations. I feel like that usually happens in fantasy written by male authors, that the male main protagonist is obsessed with a girl and puts her on a pedestal. And when she refuses, he, you know, holds on to his obsession and he feels treated unfairly by her because he just wants to be in love with her. And why doesn't she want to be in love with him, you know? He doesn't accept that, and the male main protagonist, thinks he can, you know, woo her or make her fall in love with him if he just holds on long enough. And let me just tell you, you cannot make anyone fall in love with you. You cannot make anyone fall in love with anyone or anything. People have their own mind. So then the male main protagonist, usually in fantasy books, is then rewarded for his devotion by the woman or girl finally giving in and being together with the man, usually by surrendering all of her established character. I hate this trope because the reader is supposed to feel bad for the male main protagonist because the woman denies him his right to, you know, love, her attention and even sex. And I hate this trope. This is such an incel mindset. It's such a toxic mindset. I hate it. oh my god, I hate it so much. I cannot tell you how much I hate this trope. It needs to die in the fire of 1,000 suns. We just need to just not do this anymore. There are several problems with this trope. The first is that the male main protagonist thinks a woman owes him something. Like, nobody owes you anything for being nice. The second problem is that the woman falls for the protagonist, but sacrificing her entire established character. And the third problem is that the protagonist often tends to read way too much into the woman's behavior when she's just, you know, nice to him, just normal behavior, just normal niceties. I don't want this incel bullshit fantasy trope anymore. I mean, it reflects obviously the culture that we have. You know, I'm not saying that all men are like that, but like a lot of them think that women owe them something, women owe them a smile, or women owe them their attention and love and sex, which is just not the case. And I just wish we wouldn't have that anymore in books, or we wouldn't see that anymore in books, or that it would be clearly labeled as a bad behavior and not as it is here and as it is in a lot of other fantasy books, as something that, you know, the reader is supposed to feel bad for the male main protagonist, because I don't feel bad for Locke. Locke, you're a stupid ass, you're a moron, just grow up, move on, and leave Sabitha alone. Now, I want to say that I still enjoyed it. I still gave it 3 stars, this book, because I liked the first half of it. It just derailed in the last half of it. And I also have to say that the author, Scott Lynch, struggled with depression while writing this book, and it clearly shows in Locke's character, because he struggles also with depression. And also the author went through a divorce while writing this book, and as someone who struggles with depression herself, I have the utmost respect for him still writing this book despite his struggles. But please, goddammit, give Sabitha her character back and just make Locke grow up, please. Thank you. That's it. That was my rant. But I feel like this is a problem not just in literature or in fiction, it's a problem in the real world that too many men think like this. So, question, is the series worth your time? Partly. The first book definitely. It is a fun story. It is pretty much self-contained. It has a satisfying ending, so you can read it as a standalone. You don't need to read the other 2 books. It has fun characters. It is very well written, interesting world that is rich and detailed and really comes to life. Definitely recommend the first book. The 2 other books in the series, I would not recommend them, to be honest, because you can read the first book as a standalone. Even if you have an itch to scratch for a pirate book, there are better pirate books out there, especially since they are just pirates for about half of the book. There is the chance that the other 3 books might be great and might be, you know, blowing me off my feet, because I will be continuing the series since I've already read all of them. And then I would say, when the other 3 books are finally out, I think maybe if they are good, you can read on in the series. But so far I don't see the necessity of it, to be quite honest. Read the first book, don't read the second and third. Alright, so that was it for today. Please let me know whether you've read the series and what do you think about it. And also let me know what you think about this fantasy trope of male protagonists being obsessed with their love interests and how that is handled in literature, maybe in general. I would definitely love to get into a discussion with you about that. So that's it for today. I hope you're having a wonderful, wonderful day. I hope you're reading something magical and wonderful. And I will see you soon. Bye!